I think one of the more common questions that I get asked when people ask me what I do for a living and I say I'm a professional musician, usually the follow-up question is, oh, what band do you play in? And this is revelatory of a couple of things. First and foremost, certainly that people's conception of what a professional musician is really limited to their exposure to popular forms of music, and taking for granted the prevalence of music within our broader societies and how an individual could make their way and earn a living professionally through the broad offerings of music that permeates throughout the society. I think this also reveals that sort of skepticism that, well, if you call yourself a professional musician, that must mean a couple of things. Like, it must mean that you're somehow famous, or at least the people that you're connected to are somehow famous. Of course, that's nonsense. It suggests that if I haven't heard of you, it must mean then that you're not that good, or at least that you're not that successful. So I'm not sure there's a disconnect then that would happen. If someone asks me that question and I tell them the groups that I play in, and then they say, well, I've never heard of those people, it discredits me, right? Rather than revealing the lack of knowledge, the ignorance, if you will, of the individual actually asking the question. And so it's always interesting to encounter somebody who isn't satisfied with the answers that I then provide when they ask me, what bands do you play in? Because invariably they're going to be bands that you've never heard of. And on top of that, the very nature of my career is that I don't play with a singular band, I play with many. And again, this sort of goes against the grain of what most people's perception is that a professional musician does, and the types of services that are offered. There's an old adage that gets passed around a lot that those who cannot do, teach, right? If you can't hack it as a player, well, you must teach lessons. So invariably, that question comes out. And again, it sort of adds into this layer of skepticism coming from the individual asking me that question, like, oh, I've never heard of any of these bands. What do you like teach music to fill in the gaps? Well, the answer to that is yes, but I teach for a variety of reasons. It's great income, absolutely it is. Most of my teaching duties right now are simply with private students, although I have worked with a number of different schools and different institutions teaching, and I will again in the future because it's a great job, especially if you're partnered with the right institution who shares your values. But private lessons is fantastic because I'm an independent contractor in that regard. I can set my own schedule. I can do it in my own time. I can negotiate for my own wages, which I really appreciate, rather than having somebody fix that wage or negotiate that wage on my behalf. I'm the one that gets to negotiate that, and I vastly prefer that to any other tactic towards earning a living. So yeah, I do teach. There's times when I'm teaching more, times when I'm teaching less. I think one of the most amazing parts about being a teacher is the knowledge that I've acquired over many years. I know that I'm passing that on to another individual. It has its ups and downs, certainly, because not everybody who comes to study with me is ready to receive that knowledge. But back to our original question of what it means to be a professional musician, especially in the eyes of the audience, I think that there are several expectations. One of them is that the stuff that you're doing has got to be something that I've heard of. Otherwise, you're probably lying, or you're probably boasting and inflating yourself in order to make it look and sound more impressive. There are very few people, I think, that would know all of the groups that I play in, except for the people that are very close to me that I talk to about these groups quite a bit. I play in a variety of different styles. As most musicians that I matriculate with, who are in my social and professional networks, we all sort of rotate throughout different styles. There are a few people I know who are very, very hard specialists. And those are mostly people who specialize in either a regional or culturally specific music. For instance, I play a lot of North Indian classical music. I play the tabla, and I've studied, for 23 years on this instrument. And I play with a lot of musicians who this is their only focus, is North Indian Hindustani classical music. Similarly with Arabic classical music, I play a lot with various Arabic musicians. That even varies depending upon region. The Egyptians play in one style, whereas somebody from Jordan may play in another. The Khaliji musicians who live near the Persian Gulf, they have a whole other approach. There's a classical approach, there's folkloric approaches, etc., etc. This is the same in North Indian classical music as well. It's not unique to Arabic. But I do play a lot with these other musicians because it's a skill that I have, especially on the rick, the Arabic tambourine is my main voice within that. And when people need that particular instrument, they know that I'm someone that they can call. Most people that you talk to don't even consider that this would be an outlet for a professional musician. I think most people have this consideration that there's two types of professional musicians. There's the ones who play in one band or one style. Those are the ones that show up on the radio and or on television. Here's somebody who's famous and well known from one particular band or one solo artist who plays one type of music or something. Or there's the type of professional player who does like film and television, radio jingles, the session player, as it were. Just to share with you a very quick note or anecdote about this. I was picking somebody up from LAX, the airport. This was years ago, 15 years ago at least. Maybe even more. And I stopped off at a bar in Venice, California, called the Library Ale House. It's a good little bar, a lot of good beers on tap. And I was just gonna sit down and have one pint. I had a couple of hours to kill. Maybe there was a TV on. I could, catch up on a game or a TV show or something like that. I don't know exactly what was on. But I sat down and I ordered my beer and I sat, and a gentleman came and took the stool next to me, and we struck up a conversation, and he started talking about himself, and I was asking more about what he did, and he mentioned that he was a musician, kind of as a hobbyist. He said that he really loved making music, and that as he talked about it more, he said, yeah, I like to record and I like to do that stuff, but I really like playing more with my friends, than I don't really like, like session players, I don't really like that because, they're too stiff. They don't really feel it. I feel music, whereas, most session players, it's just a job for them, so it's really stale and flat. Of course, then he turns to me and he says, but enough about me. What do you do? And I said, yeah, I'm a professional musician. And then he tried to backtrack and sort of eat his words a little bit. And I just kind of smiled and laughed to myself because I've had this conversation numerous times, where somebody opens their mouth without really knowing who it is that they're talking to and starts to make these declarations about what music is and who musicians are. And I think this is one of the dumbest statements that I encounter, which is that professional musicians don't feel it. And that's what separates, the passionate musician from this so-called professional person, which is like, I really feel music. It gives me an emotional lift and I feel connected. And so it's my emotion that drives and builds the music up to, really great levels of expression. Whereas someone who just goes and plays in studios all the time, like they're just, they just clock in and clock out like you would. Instead of a briefcase, they show up with a violin case. Or a drum set or whatever it is, that they go to the office, they set up and they play some studio stuff for the day, and then at 5 o'clock they clock out and they come home and then they pursue whatever their real passion is. No, it doesn't work like this. The musicians that I know, most of my friends are other professional players. Not all of them, but most of them. And most of them that I know embrace music as just the ultimate gift. And the ability to say, I earn my living by going out and playing music is such a gift. And very few people I know really take that for granted. I do know where some of these folks are coming from, however, when they say there's a difference between the professional player versus the amateur player. The amateur one really feels it with a lot of energy, whereas the professional player is devoid of that and just plays from a technical perspective. I don't agree with that framing of the question, but I do agree that because of the volume of material that a professional player is asked to do, just within that volume of material, it's easy for burnout to set in for those people who either start to feel worn out, or for those where resentment starts to creep in. Specifically the resentment that I don't get paid enough for this shit, or this isn't really what I want to be doing. I'd rather be doing X. I don't want to play this style of music. I'd rather be playing jazz. Or I'd rather be, jamming with my own band than playing drums, filling in with this other person's band. I think there is a slight mindset that I think is corrosive within a lot of circles, which is you have to say yes to every single gig that comes across your table. You don't have to. There's a fear of missing out that takes place. If this person calls me and I say no, they'll never call me again, and they'll strike me from the list, and I'll never get a gig with that person again. Not true. Sometimes it may be true. Maybe you encounter someone who's just as resentful and says, if this person says no, they're finished. I'll never call them again. There's a lot of insecurity in the sense that if someone else is busy and saying no to your gig, well, nuts to that guy. Don't ever call him again. He's too busy doing other things. Or this has happened to me quite a bit. I get booked with one style of music, and everyone assumes that this other style that I had played, I suddenly don't do it anymore. Again, this is all nonsense. You can solve a lot of these issues by communicating effectively, but that's left for another day. But burnout does set in, or resentment, right? This does set in, and I do encounter a lot of musicians this way. And I find it very sad, but I don't spend a lot of time dwelling on it, honestly, because the direction has to be forward. It's always a forward-moving direction. And my life, I've worked very hard to sort of structure it around the different types of music that I make, and how can I play those styles at a high enough level that I can then go out and monetize that skill set. It's been a very long, very arduous journey. And as time goes on, I'm sure I'm going to share more of those stories and anecdotes with you guys right here in these videos that I do. But I'll leave you with this sort of final thought of the day, which is when it comes to this designation of who's a professional musician and who isn't, there are a couple of distinctions why that term is important. Okay. I think colloquially we think of a professional musician must be someone who's paid, like a professional basketball player is someone who gets paid to play basketball versus some basketball player who just goes out and plays. But what we don't do is we don't stand around thinking, well, this professional basketball player, he doesn't really feel basketball. He doesn't really love it as his passion. He's just really good at it, and that's just his day job. I don't hear people refer to athletes in this sensibility at all. Or what about an actor? Here's a professional actor versus an amateur, non-professional actor. Um, the professional actor doesn't really feel it. Nonsense. So why is it that colloquially we refer to professional musicians as these robotic technicians that only know how to perform mezzo forte, um, with zero dynamic variation and no phrasing? Um, how is it that we've come to experience this? Well, perhaps there's a precedent. I don't know. I encounter some issues with some players, but it's not across the board. That's an overgeneralized statement. Um, so how it is that we built this into our cultural reference of musicians, but not with other art forms, I'm not sure I fully understand. Um, Professional players generally do have a highly, highly refined skill set. And you only get that skill set by dedicating time to acquire it. Because natural talent is not going to be enough to get what you need to be effective within a professional market. It means you lock yourself in a practice room and you shed and you chip away at this until it starts to emerge as a verifiably um, very strong and robust skill set that everybody can measure, because you've got the sound, you've got the mind, and you can take direction quickly and easily. Those are the skills that are really looked for, that and being a good person to be around. Hopefully that's the easy part. So how this distinction gets made colloquially, I really don't know. I don't fully understand. But the players that I know, most of them are extremely passionate about music because it's all that we do, except for maybe sitting down in your garage and making a video while you drink coffee. Some of us do that. What do you think?